how to reuse potting soil is probably the question that anybody who has ever grown any plant asks themselves. In this video, I'm going to explain you how to do it and also tell you about a very important consideration that unfortunately not everybody thinks about when reusing potting soil, which leads to disasters. I was trying to get for some time that plant in order to show you how to reuse potting soil. Unfortunately, I was not that successful. However, I was traveling recently, so now I do have some spinach which dried out because I didn't have opportunity to water it, and also some of them are still going to bolt and produce seeds. So I will just take a little bit of this soil to show you how to do it. And by the way, if you have not yet watched my video about growing spinach in container, which is very popular on YouTube, do watch. The link is in the description and in the first comment. So what's very important to consider? The first question that you have to ask yourself before even thinking about reusing your potting soil is, what's the cause of death of your plant? I cannot emphasize enough how important it is, because the success of repotting would 100% depend on this. To simplify, there are two types of factors that lead to plant death, so that you have a pot with soil to reuse. I assume that if the plant is not dead, then you would just replant it with all this soil to a bigger pot or to your garden. So then assumption is that the only reason that you have a soil to use, to reuse, is because one or more of your plants are dead. So as I said, very important to consider the cause of death. It can be due to biotic factors. So for example, due to a disease like caused by fungi or mycetes, bacteria, viruses, or it can be abiotic factor, so caused, for example, by dry weather, or just because it was an annual plant and it produced seeds and it died as it's supposed to be. So these are abiotic factors. So if your plant died because of biotic factors, of those pathogens that I mentioned, then you should not reuse this soil. There is a way still to reuse it for planting. However, if your plant is dead because of those reasons, it means that it's likely you are not qualified enough, even if I explain how to do it, to ensure that you get your soil that is ready for use without being a danger to the plants which are there. So if your plants are dead because of abiotic factors, not related to any pathogens or any fungi or mycetes, viruses or bacteria, then you can reuse this soil. It's very important to consider what factor very carefully, because, for example, in this situation where I didn't water my plants and they died, these are biotic factors, just because they didn't have enough water and they dried, so it's a physical factor. Now, if you plant too much, if you water too much, you would have root rot, and then your plant would also die. However, the root rot will be caused by pathogens, so then it becomes biotic factor and you cannot reuse your soil. So I would say, if you're not sure, don't reuse it. If you are sure, then you can reuse it. That's the rule number one. Now, what do you do if you don't reuse it? First of all, throw it away. Second of all, you can still try to use it in your garden, but not where you grow something important for you, first of all, and second of all, not putting all the soil in one place, but to spread it in a very thin layer hoping that your biota, which is already in the soil, will gradually, let's say, eat or destroy the biota, bad biota pathogens which were in your soil. Now that depends on your level of risk. If you're risky, if you don't mind, if for some years, for example, there will be some issues in some area of your garden, do it. If you do, also consider that viral diseases are very difficult, if not impossible, to get rid of. So then if your plant died from viral diseases, you might do some damage to your garden, so don't do that. And if you don't know, it might be actually a virus why your plant is died. Again, very risky. Now, with all these warnings and disclaimers, let's assume that your plant is dead because of abiotic reason, early frost, and now you can definitely reuse this soil. That's very easy to do. There are only two rules. The first rule is, when you are reusing the soil for planting something else, never plant the plants from the same family. For example, if you used it this year to grow tomatoes in a pot, and then it's winter, so tomatoes died, and you want next year to grow tomato, please don't. Or if you want to grow eggplant or potatoes or bell peppers, also don't, because they are from the same family. The reason for that is, first of all, because the same family plants mostly use the same nutrients from the soil. So the soil would be deficient in exactly those nutrients that this plant needs. And secondly, because pathogens, the diseases, are very similar for the plants from the same family, or especially like if it's the same plant exactly, and they tend to stay in soil. So if you use this soil for the same plant next year, it's likely that again those diseases will come to your new plant very fast, and you definitely do not need it. So rule number one, use soil. Actually, it's now rule number two. Rule number one is don't use if your plant is dead because of biotic factors. Rule number two, if you're reusing your soil, don't plant plants from the same family. And now, rule number three is about how to actually reuse this potting soil. You need to add nutrition to that, nutrition that was used by the previous plants. Now, it's very difficult to know what macro and micronutrients the plant exactly extracted from the soil and what exactly needs to be needed. That's why you need to add something which is complex, which is full of all the different compounds, which is organic fertilizers. For example, composted manure, composted leaves, grass, whatever compost you have, vermicompost as well. So anything natural, organic, which contains a lot of nutrition in it, is great. It's very difficult to say in which proportion to add it, because it depends on your soil, on your previous plant. Maybe you just planted seeds and then they didn't grow, and then you don't have lots of nutrient deficiencies, right? But I would recommend an overall just use 50% of the soil and 50% of this organic compost, for example. Mix it thoroughly, and of course don't forget that before doing that you need to remove all the dead plant materials, including roots, just to make a proper texture, so it's easier to work with it. If you didn't remove roots, it's also okay. Eventually, if you have good microbiota, bacteria and fungi and so on in your soil, then they will reuse it, and it will be composting. It will be composted and again used by your plants. So it's not a big deal. So with these three simple rules, you can definitely reuse your soil safely and to great results. Let's repeat them again. The first rule is only use soil if the plant is dead from abiotic factors. Rule number 2, when reusing soil, don't plant plants from the same family as before. And the third rule, add organic fertilizers.